to first express my deepest and most profound appreciation to the leadership of the Uhuru Solidarity movement here in Seattle for making this event possible, to Comrade Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee, to Jesse Neville, who is the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and all of you for coming out. I want to say that we have been for many years now organizing what at one time we were calling African People's Solidarity Day. This was something that was done to give North Americans and white people an opportunity to express solidarity with the struggle of African people to be free. And for many, many years, we would have mostly Africans who would come out to these sessions and very few white people who would show up. But something is happening in the world right now. This social system is experiencing a profound crisis that makes it extremely difficult for white people to live in this isolated world, or with the assumption of being isolated and insulated from the rest of the world. It's changing. And this crisis of imperialism has made that occur. But I want to say that you represent a chink in the armor of this whole rotten, foul social system. I want to thank you for coming out, and I want to talk to you about moving us forward. First of all, I have to say that I am the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party. It is a revolutionary organization, not to be confused with hands up, don't shoot, not to be confused with this retreat to a civil rights era statement of Black Lives Matter, because Black lives don't matter at all to this social system and never will until there is Black power, right? So, not to be confused with that. I am the chair also of the African Socialist International, which is an international organization. The African People's Socialist Party is the U.S. section or front of the African Socialist International. The African Socialist International is a single revolutionary party of African people stretching across the globe. We are active in places like occupied Tanzania, known as South Africa. We are building, even as we have this discussion, I suspect that if this is being live streamed, the comrades in South Africa are participating in this meeting. We are building in Kenya, in East Africa, right now as we have this discussion under the leadership. In every instance, these are young African people who are leading in South Africa, working class African people. And we are in almost every province in South Africa. We are working and building under the leadership of a young 27-year-old African woman in Kenya. We're working in Sierra Leone and in Ghana, in West Africa. We are organizing and have organizations in Sweden, in France, in what they used to call the United Kingdom, but it's not so united nowadays. Not so much of a kingdom nowadays either. And we are organizing throughout this country. And if this discussion that we're hearing up to now sounds a little strange, it's precisely because the United States government succeeded in defeating the Black Revolution of the 60s. I want to say that because it's important for you to understand when we talk about revolution, and that's what we're talking about, revolution, we have concluded that this social system has no redeeming qualities at all. It has no redeeming qualities. And that people on the planet Earth will never, ever, ever be free if it's left left up to the United States or to the entire imperialist system to make that happen. Right. There will never ever be any freedom. Right. And that we delude ourselves and we delude other peoples when we pretend that there is a solution to the problems of the peoples of the world and this country existing. There's a solution inside the system itself. The system is the problem. Yeah. The system is the problem. So we are a revolutionary organization. And we are just finished an incredible 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party that happened barely a month ago in St. Louis. You know St. Louis. Even if you've never been there, you know St. Louis when it was called Ferguson. Yeah. Ferguson is an outgrowth of St. Louis. Ferguson is one of the 92 different municipalities that were created in that county by white people running from St. Louis as St. Louis got blacker and blacker, setting up their own cities all around the place. Yeah. And their own police departments, their own school systems, and then, of course, the traffic cops that got the income from the city by arresting African people or stopping African people raising revenue in that fashion. Ferguson was one of those. And Ferguson, of course, is the place where Mike Brown was murdered by a white guy in a police uniform, right? On August, what was that, 9th, 2014. And the thing that was striking about Ferguson was not the fact that they murdered Mike Brown, because the cops have been murdering African people in a very escalating process and period, even before Ferguson. Yeah. Yes. But what made Ferguson stand out wasn't even the rebellion that happened. The rebellion was really important. We had a rebellion in St. Petersburg, Florida, in 1996 that was much greater in terms of its intensity than what happened in Ferguson. In 1996 in St. Petersburg, Florida, the Africans actually brought a police helicopter down. You don't know about it because there was no social media that we had access to. But Ferguson was important because when they killed Mike Brown, before Jesse Jackal or Al Charlatan could get to town and begin prayer services, the young African working class stood up. And they stood up. Their slogan was not Black Lives Matter. It wasn't hands up, don't shoot. Their slogan was kill the police. That's what their slogan was. And their slogan was kill the police, because every African living in our communities, and especially young Africans, every day of our lives, have to contend with this entity of state power. Yeah. That's the contact that we have with the government, is through the police. That's right. Every day. Stopping every day. New York, something like 850,000 people stopped and searched. And most of them African, or what they call Latinos. And most of them not charged with anything. This is colonialism at work. Yes. This is counterinsurgency at work. And the same thing was happening all around the country in various ways. We know about New York because the ACLU filed a suit. Similarly, in Philadelphia, filed a suit. But it's happening everywhere, and we know it in our lives. And because for the colonized, the dictatorship is not hidden. People like to talk about the hidden dictatorship of capital and capitalism. It ain't hidden for the colonized. We live with it every day. There is no such thing as freedom of speech in our community. There's no such thing as freedom of assembly in the African community. In fact, dictatorship, as you know, is rule without regard for law. So it doesn't matter what the damn law is, it doesn't apply in the colony. It has never applied in the colony. So that's what we have to live with. And then on August 9, 2014, we saw this magnificent uprising by the young African working class. But the other thing that happened almost immediately, we saw descend on Ferguson, St. Louis. More opportunists, more sellouts per square inch than you could find any place in the world. George Soros sent in all kinds of money, hired these persons who were supposed to be calling themselves organizers and activists and protesters, professional protesters. Soros is one of the forces that brought them into St. Louis. And there were others. All kinds of money came there. But we came to St. Louis. And the thing that brought us to St. Louis was the African working class. When I heard on the news, kill the police, I said, pack my bags. And went into St. Louis. And we've been there since then. And part of what has happened in St. Louis, the lights are gone, the TV cameras are gone. Soros has limited the amount of money that he's putting into them, but we are there. And we're building concretely, and you will see. After this, we'll show some more of what has happened in St. Louis since we've been there. So we went into St. Louis, and that was important. And it was important to us what happened in St. Louis is because I was a part of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. I lived with it. I was surprised that I lived to be older than 30 years old. We didn't expect to live that long. We expected revolution to occur. And it was in the air everywhere, not just where I live, not just here in Seattle. I know about some of the forces who were here in Seattle, right? I'm talking about everywhere on earth. The oppressed people were rising up to fight against imperialist white power. People wanted to make sure that our children will be able to have a life. And there's not an African that I know who can say with any kind of certainty that our children will have any kind of life. People are always concerned if the child is 15, 20 minutes late getting home, something has happened to the child. This is our reality. So this government was faced with this uprising here and around the world. The American government murdered Patrice Lumumba in Congo, one of the most incredible, honest, dignified revolutionaries that Africa has ever produced in Congo. The American government, Kennedy and Eisenhower, because Kennedy was just coming in, Eisenhower was just going out, but the program remained the same to crush that revolutionary movement that was taking the resources of Congo and trying to turn it over to the African people ourselves. And Lumumba, who was working with Kwame Nkrumah, to try to unite all of Africa. So Lumumba was killed. 1966, the United States government overthrew Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first elected president of Ghana, and whose life work was to unite Africa, following the influence of Marcus Garvey, who had said in the 1920s, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. And he was able to say that and knew that it was necessary to say that because we are one people who have been forcibly dispersed around the world and lost contact with ourselves. We disappeared once we left Africa, where we left Africa, got on the ship in Africa as Africans, and then we get off the ship as something else. We become Haitians, Jamaicans. We become Afro-Americans. That's the nicest thing that we became, that it was called. And then, of course, as you know, on the continent of Africa, 1884 and 85, Europeans sat down at a table in Berlin, Germany, and carved up Africa. These borders that you see in Africa today were not created by African people. There were no borders in Africa, just like there were no borders here. Because the borders really are property lines, right? And so what happened is Africa got carved up. And then we follow that with the false national consciousness that we are no longer Africans. We are Somalis. We're Ghanaians. We're Trinidadians. We're Jamaicans. We're Haitians. We are Black Brits. We're Afro-Swedes. We are Negro Americans. And that's being gentle again, right? And so Africans were lost. And I think it's really important to understand this concept of false national consciousness, because white people have one too. That's why it's so difficult often for white people to recognize the fact that I'm an African. If I got on the damn ship as an African in Africa, how the hell did I get off as something else? Right? Right? So the problem, of course, is that if I am an African, who the hell are you? Right? And that's an unsettling kind of question. Can be, and dreadlocks won't change the discussion. Right? So we are one people that's been dispersed against our will all around the world. And you look at this, I say false national consciousness. You know, you've probably heard me speak about it before, that there's a place in West Africa that they call Cameroon. They call it Cameroon because when the Portuguese first came there, they found a lot of shrimp. And the word Cameroon comes from the Portuguese word for shrimp. So there are a lot of black people walking around calling themselves shrimp. But they are not shrimp. And you take this place called Nigeria, where Africans, when they are out of that place, really braggadocio about being from Nigeria, right? But the truth is that there was no such place called Nigeria until 1915. A man named Frederick Lugard, a Brit, who is the person that really constructed, gave shape and form to neo-colonialism or indirect rule, was sent to these territories. There were two specific territories in West Africa that England wanted to turn into one administrative whole. And Frederick Lugard was the person that they sent to make that happen. And Lugard had a mistress who became his wife, whose name was Flora Shaw. And he was saying, what shall we call this place? And Flora Shaw's suggestion was to call it nigger area. Hence, Nigeria. It's a false national consciousness. We are one people, forcibly dispersed at gunpoint. We didn't come to this place or come to what is now known as Haiti or come throughout the Americas looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a consequence of having been brought here. It's really important to understand that because I'm talking about a particular relationship that all of us have with each other and that we have with other people. So we lost our freedom. And we've been put in this situation where all of our liberal friends would come up to us and say things like, look how much progress you've made. You've heard that before. You used to be on plantations picking cotton. And now you can get shot down in Ferguson. Look how much progress you made. But the point is, our history did not start on a cotton plantation in Mississippi or anyplace else. And if you want to talk to us about progress, we used to be a free and independent people. Talk to us about our relationship to freedom and independence. That's the thing that you can say you made progress for as a consequence of us closing that huge gap that has been imposed on us. So our struggle is one to regain our freedom, our total liberation, absolute unconditional freedom. That's what the struggle is about. And in the 1960s, the African Revolution here and around the world was a part of the worldwide revolution. Part of the revolution that was being pursued by the incredible Vietnamese people who for a while carried the colonized people on their shoulders by themselves, fighting against first the French and then the United States, and kicked their asses of both the French and the United States. Part of the same revolutionary project that sent Ernesto Che Guevara from Argentina into Cuba, and then from Cuba into Africa, and then where he tried to participate in creating a continental-wide revolutionary movement. And then from Africa, of course, into Bolivia, where he was wounded, captured, and then murdered by CIA in that place. This was a part of a whole revolutionary project of the oppressed peoples around the world. This was the fundamental crisis of imperialism, where everybody was up in arms because everybody wants to be free. And what has happened, of course, is this narrative has been created by the imperialist white power that suggests that we don't want that British colonialism was not something that they did willingly. He said it was the white man's burden to go out and take civilization and Christianity to all of the pagans and uncivilized masses. Say we don't want to do it, but it's our burden. That comes with the turf. You get civilized, you get Christianity, you just have an obligation to go out and take your gun and share it with everybody else around the world. This was the logic. This contributes to the kind of narrative that has dominated the world. And it's BS. Yeah. It's not true. Right. People want to be free. Yes. And so this movement developed, and the U.S. government and all the imperialist powers collectively were successful in crushing this revolutionary movement. And they murdered people all across the globe. And they murdered people right here in this country. They murdered Malcolm X. They murdered Martin Luther King. They killed more than 30 members of the Black Panther Party. They killed from our community say some things like, because they think that they're really important because they have just emerged on the scene, and of course they just got here, which means history just started, right? And they say things like, this is not your father's, your grandfather's civil rights movement. I said, you're damn right. My grandfather had eclipsed civil rights and was struggling for black power a long time ago. Nobody's fighting for civil rights but you. Right? You. So we had this defeat of the revolution. And that has been something, a problem that the African People's Socialist Party has been struggling with for more than 2 generations. But more than 2 generations. But it was revolution that shook this whole system to its foundation. the courage of the Vietnamese people, even today, people who have no intention of ever doing anything at all to struggle against the system and walk around proudly wearing T-shirts with Che Guevara's picture on it. Because that was the last important time. This moment in history was so crucial to the ability of the people to be able to envision a future without the yoke of imperialist white power around our necks. So that's what this struggle was about. And that's what our party has been involved in struggling to complete. We made it a mission to complete the black revolution of the 60s. We say, people say, well, we need coalitions. Get a coalition if you want to, but that's not what we need. They didn't go out crushing coalition. They crushed the Black Panther Party. They crushed revolutionary organizations. They crushed rebel organizations that were not running around saying Black Lives Matter, but were really fighting to be a self-governing people, to take power in our own hands. And the African People's Socialist Party has been the custodian of this revolutionary project for more than 46 years. We are the last one standing. We are the organization that's here. And concentrated in the party is the history, all the lessons and contradictions and problems of the last period of revolutionary struggle. You find it in this African People's Socialist Party. We're not running around saying block this interstate or block that interstate. To what end? We're not professional protesters. To what end? We are preparing to govern. That's the objective. If you're not talking about power, then what the hell are you out here for anyway? We deny the whole concept. They're concerned because the Chinese show they got more chance than everybody. Right. They fought for power. That's what the struggle is all about. And we've been led into this treacherous place. And so I think it's important for me to say this. This is what this revolutionary movement is about. We want the power of our lives. We want to be able to say that our children will have a future, not because a good white man or Negro got elected, or white woman for that matter, but because we have the power in our own hands to determine that our children will have a future. That's what we have to do. So, the African People's Socialist Party recognized a long time ago, even back during the 1960s, even the Uhuru movement, which predates the African People's Socialist Party, had recognized these serious struggles we used to have with these white leftists. You know, who leave their school libraries and venture into the African community, bringing all of their wisdom about revolution to us. and who moved with this basic kind of assumption that is not just in the left, but in European society altogether. That's what you found, that the left brought this with them. That recognized Africans and Mexicans and other people sort of auxiliary forces to facilitate the success of the real McCoy, the real revolution, which was going to be led by what they call the white working class. And that was strange, you know, and for a number of reasons, because if the truth be told, the ones who were in the trenches that we had to do battle with was the white working class. Yeah. These were dilettantes who were coming to our communities from their college campuses, telling us how to make the revolution. And the reason they came to our communities from their college campus to tell us how to make the revolution, because they were scared to death to go into a white working class community to talk to them about communism and socialism, because they would have got their asses kicked. Want to talk about communism, socialism, go to African community, go to Mexican community, go to somebody else. Be damn sure won't get away with that in the white community. That was true then. Of course, we're going to turn the tide on that now. That's what this is all about. So, I just want to say we came out of our 7th Congress. We've established a tradition in the African Revolutionary Movement where we've come together. This is, as I said, the 7th one, where Africans have come from around the world to participate in electing our leadership and adopting what is now a 5-year program. Well, first of all, it starts with summing up our situation, summing up how we got to be here, because you need to know something about how you got here, don't you? Yeah. I mean, I just saw not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, where the American government was involved in sending a spacecraft to Jupiter. And they didn't say they sent the spacecraft to Jupiter because they wanted to grab all of whatever minerals they could find out there or take the military high ground. They said the reason they sent it to Jupiter is because it was the end of the universe. It was the end of the universe. And they figured that if they could get to Jupiter and explore that, they could see how the whole earth began, how the world began. And that made sense to me. And it's important, if you really want to know what's happening here, if you really want to know, it's important to get all of that information. If you really want to know what it is that we're confronted with today, what produced Donald Trump? Yeah. The same thing that produced Barack Hussein. Off AFRICOM with a vengeance that was engaged more in attacking Africa than it had ever been before. His Justice Department is the one that put $1 million additional bounty on Assata Shakur. That was Obama's Justice Department. That wasn't Trump. That was Obama's Justice Department. Because America is an imperialist government. And it's an imperialist government whether there is an African in charge, or white or orange person in charge, or white person. It is imperialist. Uhuru. And its objective is the same. It's not like some revolution happened and then now there was Obama. Right. No. It's the same system. And it's because we live off fantasies that have substituted for revolutionary politics over more than the last 2 generations, that we could be duped by this left-hand jump shot and pimp walking Negro, right? He brought nothing to us. And so now we're at a place where we have to recapture the black revolution of the 60s, and I think it's happening. I think there's something in the air. I know there is. I see it every place. I see it in this room. I see it in St. Louis. I see it in South Africa. Everywhere we are, we see people who are looking for revolution. And this is something that these petty politicians in the Democratic Party, they don't get it. They say they oppose to Trump. And then the first thing they do if they're going to run to office is they try to get as close politically to where Trump is as Trump. And the people have already indicated that they're tired of this sellout kind of politics. That's one of the reasons that Trump was able to capture all of these stupid white people. You understand? And I'm talking about all of them. Stupid white people, because he was able, because first of all, he didn't have a contest. There was nobody contending for those stupid white people. There was nobody helping them to understand that if you have a contradiction here, your contradiction is not because some African is attacking you. Your contradiction is because America has attacked Africans and everybody else in the world, and that if you want to be free, you've got to unite with the African Revolution and the Revolution of the people. Nobody had the courage to say that. No Democratic Party person going to say that. And certainly not this insipid Bernie Sanders, who you love so much. This Bernie Sanders who claims to be some kind of socialist who's going to give you the governor. That's really going to do it, isn't it? That's going to change everything, isn't it? Of course not. The only thing can change is power in the hands of the people. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't vote under any circumstances. That's not my position at all. But I am saying that voting is not the solution. That's one thing. They are never going to put a revolution on the ballot. And I'm saying that we can talk about how we can use the electoral process to the extent that we can use the electoral process not as individuals, because every individual who runs is doing it for the people, right? That's what they say. Is that what they say? They're doing it for the people. I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about some forces that have to be responsible to a revolutionary project like Jesse Neville. When he ran for mayor in St. Petersburg, Florida, that only has a 23% African population. And he ran under the slogan, unity. Everybody likes to talk about it through reparations. And he drove them crazy. And you saw evidence of that because you saw this news clip where this white guy who he was debating, when he was debating the mayors, all the candidates for mayor, this white guy said, well, Mr. Neville, your people got reparations when they got Barack Obama. That was your reparations. And it went viral. You understand? But this is the critical question. Reparations make white people honest. Yeah. This stuff, there's a man whose name was Robert Mangolisa Sobukwe, who was the leader of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azani in South Africa. And he used to always talk about the white people who love us, right? And he said that they will ride your back, and they will sympathize with you. They say, oh boy, we sure feel bad about what's happening to you. We don't like the way you were treated, etc., but they will never get off your back. You understand? And that's the kind of thing that we face a lot of time. There are people in the city council, on the board of aldermen, all the persons in St. Louis. The first out, white people, first out, whenever a protest happens, the first out. Anytime the police shoot somebody out with their protest sign, Black Lives Matter. But at the time when the board of alderpersons is working to try to reduce the number of wards from 28 to 14, cut it in half, because of the growing African population, and they want to mute the power of the African population, and they want to make it harder for somebody to get elected. It means that you're going to have to rely on the corporations to get elected because the territory you have to cover is so much larger now. She votes against that. She's one of the white people who loves us. So I'm saying that we have to struggle for power, and you have to be united with that. When you unite with the reparations demand that we are talking about now, when you unite with USM, you're united with the Revolutionary Project. Yes. That's what we're doing. We're saying that this country, this government has no redeeming values. And that you can unite with. I want to thank everybody for coming out, and Marissa and all your comrades for making this important meeting happen. You should join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. You should join the Uhuru movement because there's space here for everybody. And I know you want to do something. That's why you hear people tired of just being spectators and consumers of information. You come out and consume information. Vanguard of this process, and this crowd of people now, you will see, is going to grow all over this country. We are establishing the new agenda for what revolutionary activity looks like. You will see the Black Power Blueprint. It establishes the blueprint of what revolutionary activity looks like, not just mindless protest, but toward some end. And that end is the capture of political power over our own lives. We are preparing to govern, and you can give tremendous support to this. And when you support it, what you're doing is supporting the end of imperialism that's responsible for the contradictions that everybody on earth faces. White women who are tired of being exploited and oppressed, white homosexuals who are tired of being oppressed, all white workers, etc., who are tired of what's happening here. The way out of this is not trying to fight for your own white rights, but to destroy the foundation of the entire capitalist system, which is the oppression of African people and the oppression of people around the world.